So we start by
So-
5 minutes or something.
Yeah, I'll start us off with a long introduction and introduce everybody, and then I'm going to call on you in order, and you have 5 minutes each.
Okay, and I will start by saying a few words, like 1
Of
minute.
course, yeah, go for it.
We are now streaming on YouTube and we are recording. You can start.
Okay, thank you. So welcome to the panel discussion on contact tracing. So before we start, a quick reminder. So please follow the code of conduct, which means in particular that you have to use your real name, and please don't share the link to the webinar. So let me just first say a few words on the reasons why we have this virtual panel discussion today. So of course, we have all observed that in the last few weeks, contact tracing, and in particular the design of apps and protocols for digital contact tracing, has become a very hot topic, and especially a hot topic in the media and on social networks. And we felt that tweeting may not be the best way to exchange scientific arguments and to discuss. And also 2 weeks ago with Yuval, we realized that we were going to have plenty of submissions to the RAMP session on contact tracing, and also that people were going to discuss the topic during the business meeting and so on. So we decided together with the IACR board to organize this panel discussion. And so we have found 3 volunteers to compose the panel and to moderate the discussion. So these 3 brave moderators are Luca De Feo, Leo Duca, and Matt Green. So I really would like to thank them, and also to thank our panelists who agreed to join and help enrich these discussions, despite the very short notice and last minute organization. And so I'm pretty sure that we can use this session to have fruitful discussions on many aspects of contact tracing. And so Matt, now the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Anne. So I want to try to take as little time as possible because we have so many people who have so many things to say. But I just briefly want to introduce us to the panel on contact tracing. I'm here with my fellow moderators, Luca and Leo as well. We want to thank the organizers of Eurocrypt for putting this together and everybody who's made this happen. So thank you very much. I've been asked to give the world's shortest technical introduction to what automated contact tracing is. Most everybody in this audience already knows this, but there may be some people who don't know this and people who may watch this later on YouTube and don't understand what we're here to talk about. So let me briefly explain. So you may have noticed that we're in the middle of this global pandemic and it's awful, and we want to get it under control. And one of the best strategies that we know of right now for controlling COVID-19 is to identify and isolate infected individuals. And that means that ultimately, when we find somebody who's infected, we want to figure out who they've been in contact with and exposed potentially with this virus. There's a deep literature and many techniques for doing this manually. It's typically very human intensive. It involves interviews and pencil and paper. Each time somebody is infected, they list their contacts. This approach may work. It may not scale very well though, and it doesn't work necessarily if you've been in contact with strangers, for example, on public transport. So there's been a lot of interest over the last couple of months in automating this using smartphones. And the idea behind these systems varies depending on the technology. It may involve GPS. Many of the proposals involve Bluetooth, which can be exchanged from one phone to another to allow you to determine if you've been in close proximity to someone. There are a bunch of different ways to do this, but the basic idea is that at the end of this, somehow the health department or authorities can obtain a list, or the infected individuals can obtain a list or a notification that they've been in contact with an infected individual. It goes without saying that there are many privacy concerns around this technology, and the cryptographic and security and privacy communities have come together really amazingly over the last 8 weeks or so to address those issues. And there are a number of proposals, some of which are very close to being a reality. They have names like DP3T, and I'll call it Robert and Desire, but maybe it's Desire because I'm American. These are proposals that are being pushed out by scientists. There are also some proposals that are being developed by industry, including a exposure tracing API that's being designed for imminent release by Google and Apple. Good. With all of that said, we're incredibly fortunate to have been joined by several experts in cryptography, privacy, and information security. A number of these people are currently working on automated tracing systems that may soon be in widespread deployment. So I would like to now move on and introduce very briefly our panelists. Carmela Troncoso is an assistant professor at EPFL. Her research focuses on security and privacy. She's worked on both what I would call the defensive and offensive aspects of privacy research, which means designing privacy preserving systems and developing new attacks on those systems. She's also been, I've been told, an essential driving force behind the DP3T contact tracing protocol. Claude Castelluccia is a research director at INRIA and a founding member of the Privatics Group. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. A focus of his work is data privacy and surveillance. His team has been working on the problem of exposure and contact tracing, and he's one of the team members who developed the Robert and Desir systems at INRIA. Vanessa Teague is an associate professor at the University of Melbourne. Her research focuses on privacy, election security, and big data. Beyond what I would call her strictly academic contributions, her research has been incredibly impactful, basically in the sense of looking at deployed security and privacy systems. Recently, she and her colleagues have raised concerns about an app called COVID Safe, which is now being, I understand, deployed in Australia. Ross Anderson is a professor of security engineering at Cambridge University. Ross's research spans too many different areas for me to list here. I can only say he focuses on both the technical and the economic impact of security. Ross has a more skeptical take on automated contact tracing and has recently been writing about the limitations that these apps may face in the real world. Kevin McCurley should be well known to everybody who's been attending this conference. He's a former president of IACR, has published in multiple areas, including cryptography. He retired from Google in 2018, but prior to that worked for a time on a project involving Bluetooth scanning. He also used to teach part of the Android course at Google. Modi Young is a security and privacy research scientist with Google. Oh, I apologize, Vanessa. Vanessa says that she's no longer at the University of Melbourne, and since I can't read the entire chat, I'm going to ask her to correct me when it's her turn. Sorry about that. Modi is very well known to this community, so I'd like to take this introduction to add a note. Rather than introduce his research, at Google, he's been involved in a number of privacy projects, including exposure tracing. However, today, he is not here as a representative of Google, but rather he's here to express his own opinions on this area. Good, glad I was able to say that. And finally, we have Serge Vaudenet, who's a full professor at EPFL. Serge's cryptographic work is, I think, very well known to the community, so I won't try to list it. Recently, though, in this area, he authored a critique of the DP3T contact tracing protocol, which, to give you a flavor of it, the critique, he subtitled it Between Scylla and Charybdis. And he gave, I'm told, or actually I saw part of it, a very entertaining rump session talk recently about this. Good, that's everybody. This panel will proceed as follows. First, we've asked every participant to give a 5-minute presentation. Some will have slides. We will do our best to keep track of time. I'll try to be as polite as possible, but after 5 minutes, I'm going to try to interrupt you and so we can keep on schedule. When the presentations are complete, the moderators are going to collect questions that we've seen on the IACR chat over the last several hours. We're going to monitor the ongoing Zoom chat and the IACR chat, and we'll do our best to surface the most relevant questions, which we will ask the panelists as they apply. We can't promise this will work perfectly, but we'll do our best. And that's all I have to say. So with that said, we'd like to begin with Carmela, please. So take control and go ahead.
Thank you very much, Matt, for the introduction. Let me share my screen. I'll try to be in this 5 minutes. So I'm Carmela. Matt gave a nice introduction of myself that I would do, but I want to say that I'm here to present the work of many people that have been working behind DP3T in all of the aspects to actually make this happen. And I hope to be able to, in 5 minutes, give a good enough summary of the work of our last 2.5 months. So we came here, as Matt said, because manual contact tracing, it's great. It's one of the hopes for stopping the contagion rate of COVID-19, but it has limitations. So we're thinking about how to mitigate these limitations. And epidemiology suggests that having an app to complement manual contact tracing for the cases that Matt said, what happens when we don't have enough contact tracers given the amount of contagions we have for COVID-19, or when human memory fails because we don't remember everything, or because we're just with people that we don't know. So the question that we are phrasing here is, how do we build an app that balances effectiveness? And when we mean effectiveness, is an app that enables us to have the same rate of false positives as manual contact tracing. And I'll talk with this a little bit at the end. An app that is efficient in the sense that it can run on phones, not eat the battery, not eat the bandwidth. It's deployable because COVID-19 is here right now. As Matt said, you may have noticed that we have been at home, at least in Europe, for a good 9 weeks, almost 2 months. I don't know, I don't remember anymore. So we need something that we can deploy very fast. So the server has to be very light, the application as simple as possible. And we need to make sure that while we install this app, and we will ask people to install this thing, and we say people, we mean almost every inhabitant on the planet. We would like that the app does not collide with any fundamental right. So we want to avoid privacy, but we also want to avoid any other abuse protection of the data. This app has to be used solely for contact tracing. And what is contact tracing? Matt said it is about identifying people. We don't believe that. Like, contact tracing is about notifying people that they are at risk so that they go back home and they don't create more contagion. And just a very quick flavor of what the DP3T protocol is about. And I don't want to enter in the crypto primitives or anything. I don't think that's relevant for the particular talk we're having today. And I want to explain more or less how the protocol works, because at the end of the day, it's very similar to what Google and Apple are having in their exposure notification, which is the thing that is going to be shipped to all of our phones. And for some of them, if you have already signed up to the beta, to the latest beta update, you may already have it. So how it works is that whenever you install the app will generate some private keys. And with these private keys, the app will generate what we call ephemeral identifiers. And when people are running around, these ephemeral identifiers will be broadcasted. So if people are close by, like in this case, we have here Alice with Bob and Charlie, and they will hear each other about these ephemeral identifiers, their phone will record the ephemeral identifiers they saw. If David here is far away, the idea is that Dave will not actually see the identifier of Alice, so that we can actually detect proximity, which is the goal and the main ingredient of the risk. And then if eventually here Alice actually is diagnosed COVID positive, what Alice will do with the doctor will ask her if she has the app, the doctor will ask her, do you want to participate? Do you want to notify other people that may have been close to you that they are at risk? If she says so, we plan that the doctor will provide Alice with an access code that allow Alice to upload her private keys, the keys that have been used to generate all of the ephemeral identifiers that have been seen. And then eventually all of the rest of the people will be able to get access to the secret keys, and then locally on their phone, check whether they have seen Alice or not, and check whether they saw Alice close enough for long enough to be considered at risk. And if that is the case, then actually they will raise an alarm. And our design criteria for this protocol was to have the minimum of the amount of data on the server in order to prevent abuse and protect privacy. We wanted to have the risk computation on the phone, both for privacy reasons and also for transparency, in the sense that when we compute on the phone, we know which parameters are sent. We can be very public about how is this risk made. And we need to have, we also provide an optional callback to report. If instead of the notifications, we want the users to be called, we can actually send the phone to a server and the users can be called back. But now the important thing, that this protocol is kind of the smallest of the piece in a very complex puzzle that involves the health system, the law, building an app, talking with epidemiologists, and being sure that all of this works on the mobile operating system. So with this problem came a lot of other things beyond the protocol, like how do we build authorization, how do we integrate with the health system. We have been working with, for the last month, with the Swiss health system to do this thing. How do we make sure that the wireless communication works and is efficient, that the mobile phone works? How do we dimension so that now we're asking a million of people to send things around? And then another full world of pain comes, like now we have traffic around. How do we protect traffic analysis? All of the things that we were trying to protect with the crypto and the protocol. What if we give them up? Because now we have phones talking to a server. And for this, we build a team that has multiple flavors of privacy people, systems people, cryptographers, people on wireless security. But not only that, we also had a lot of contact with epidemiologists. We have a team of 3 epidemiologists that we talk a lot to really understand what does contact mean and how do we transform the wireless signals into proximity signal. And I'm happy to talk about this more after my 5 minutes and before Mark starts shouting to me. We have law experts because there is a lot of interaction with both data protection law, but also other laws like discrimination law, like how the law is done in Switzerland that actually even defines what exposure means, and a lot of things that my time is done now, Matt, but I'll be happy to take questions after.
Okay, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. We have the next person who I'd like to move on to is, sorry about that. I just lost my internet connection a little bit. The next person right after Carmela is I'd like to move to Claude, if he's connected.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see the slides? Yes.
Yes. Well, I can see you.
Okay,
sorry,
so
I don't see the slides.
You don't see the slides?
No.
So I'm going to do that.
You need to share your screen, Claude.
Yeah, I'm doing that. So let me try again. Okay, sorry, share. Doesn't seem to be working with sharing thing. Is it working or no?
No.
Is the sharing? Okay, so the sharing stat doesn't seem to be working.
Push on share and then see if the application on the or the tab or the browser that you want to share is there, and then push on it.
Yeah, it is, but that's what I'm doing. So your entire screen, and then I cannot click on share. So
You have to probably push first what you want to share.
What do you mean push? I mean, there is this share button, right? So I'm clicking it. Okay. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Now I click.
Is it good?
Yeah.
So now you see the slide.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. So I don't know whether I will be able to do it in 5 minutes because I will tell you a story about Asterix and Obelix. I don't know if you know those 2 characters, but they're still quite famous in France. So this is the story of Asterix and Obelix and the Covix tracing app application. So basically, I don't know if you know Asterix and Obelix and their dogs. They live in a small village somewhere in France. And they have a common enemy, which are usually the Romans that wants to control their land and their data. The village is actually managed by an authority that was elected democratically. And since the beginning of the year, there is this deadly virus, which is called Covix, that is spreading out. And the authorities decided to develop a new app that is called Covix tracing app. So he asked Obelix and Asterix to take care of that. So this Obelix and Asterix are 2 good friends, but sometimes they disagree. And when they disagree, since they are Gallic, they are very loud. So Obelix, the big one, is arguing that the architecture should be decentralized. Asterix, the small one, is arguing that the architecture should be centralized. There is a 3rd guy, which is Panoramix, a wise and old man of the village that understand that actually the situation is a bit more complex than that. And if you look at proximity tracing, there are basically 2 main components, right? So there is this exposure notification component. This is where the risk score is computed, and as a result of the score, the notification is sent out to the user at risk or not. And then you have another module, which is basically the temporary ID generation and management modules that generate and manage the pseudonyms. Okay, so but let's listen to Asterix and Obelix arguments. So Asterix's first argument is that the health authority should be able to control the notification. And actually, several studies by epidemiologists have shown that the health authority should be able to control when and how the notification are sent to the people, right? Because if you don't control that, you might get into some kind of uncontrolled situation. But also, the health authority should be able to adapt quickly to the situation, and they should quickly be able to update how the risk score is being computed using the feedback from the users, and also based on the evolution of the pandemics. So Asterix is basically, utility in this kind of application is essential, right? I mean, we're talking about some kind of medical app. Is not like a social gaming kind of app where you can just trying to identify who you've been in proximity with. So he's convinced that this can only be done centrally. Asterix's second argument is that decentralizing notification is too dangerous, right? Because there are some actually attacks that were presented recently. There was actually demos out there that show that anyone, Gallics, authorities, but even the Romans can re-identify and trace all infected nodes. So which basically means that with decentralization, if you decentralize notification, you basically have to trust everybody, right? The Gallics, the Romans, but also the authority. So if you want more information, just look at the presentation that was performed last night during the RAM session by Vodenix and Viscontix. They are pretty clear on why you have this issue with decentralization. The third argument that Asterix is actually putting out is that in the privacy community, it's clear that there are some results that was presented 2 years ago at PETS that decentralization practice have some limitation, right? And according to this paper and to the community, there is clearly some fundamental trade-off between availability, security, and privacy. The paper even writes, a good design for one is an unsafe design pattern for another. The other issue is that most decentralized systems actually in practice end up using server for scalability and abuse control. And the last point, which is a very important point, is that usually the systems make unrealistic assumptions about the security of the device. The paper even writes it's too facile to heavily rely on end-user system, keeping secret keys and data, and then ignore that they are often compromised. So Asterix is very puzzled. He wonders, why suddenly this limitation does not apply to decentralized contact tracing. By the way, the docs as well is a bit confused. The argument of Obelix, I will say, are more standard. What he's saying is that generating and managing the temporary ID by the server gives too much power to the authority, and that's bad. He's also claiming that, okay, the temporary ID generation and management should be decentralized. That would provide more control to users. He's right. The third one is a bit more confused, is that centralization is bad, very bad. I heard it from activists. And so let's go quickly and ask to our friends to sign a petition. We can even ask the help of the Romans. He did. Obelix is quite popular and he has a lot of friends out there. So that's why this petition was sent a few weeks ago. So Panoramix, the wise guy, thought about it, and then he came back with a proposition. So why don't we just use an hybrid architecture where we centralize the risk score and notification, but we decentralize the temporary ID generation and the management, right? If we do that, basically we get the best of both worlds. So let's work together on a third way. And this is what we are proposing with the new proposal, which is called Desire. And maybe if we take this new architecture, which is hybrid between centralized and decentralized, we might converge to an interoperable solution for Europe, which is something very important, right? There is a big need to have solutions that are interoperable. So at the end, Asterix and Obelix agree, and they went back to work on this new proposal Desire. So my presentation was actually a call to stop this nonsense debate and try to develop together this third way. So if you want to support this initiative for a third way, or if you just want to insult us like some do, you can use this email address, which is thirdway@innoria.fr. Important disclaimer, of course, this is pure fiction, right? Any resemblance to real person and names is purely coincidental. And also, if I may, a security conference should not use Zoom. Thanks for the attention. Was it in time or yeah?
Yeah, no, you're good. Fantastic. Thank you, Claude. Okay, that was good. I enjoy anything that involves Asterix and Obelix. So good. Next up, I'd like to invite Vanessa to give her presentation. Please go ahead if you're there. I don't know if we have to do something more, or are we all frozen? Can you release screen sharing? I'm not sure if we can get anybody else. I don't really have.
Vanessa can override who's currently.
Excellent. Okay, I'm doing this on a phone. It's a little tricky. Let's see.
Vanessa, you should share your screen. Unmute yourself.
I'm unmuting you, Vanessa, against your will, but nothing happened. So much for that.
The power of centralized system.
Vanessa, do you hear us?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me back? I'm
yes,
just
it's a little grainy.
Screen now.
Oh, good. Okay.
And here we go. Okay, I hope everybody can see. So I am giving 2 talks at once, really, which reflect to some extent the different aspects of this discussion. So I've been involved in contact tracing in 2 different ways. On the one hand, I've been a small contributor to the cryptographic design of the MIT PACT project, which is the slide that you see in front of you. At the same time, I have been working with some other Australians on some basic security and privacy analysis of Australia's app. So my 5-minute talk is actually 2 2-minute talks and 30 seconds of opinion at the end. So just to kick off, here is the slide of the MIT PACT project, which is very, very similar in its basic design to the DP3T project that Carmela spoke about first. It's a decentralized system in which each person's app generates a stream of pseudo-random pings, and if you become infected, you post the seed for the pings that you generated, and then everybody else downloads that and checks on their own phone whether or not they might have been exposed to the virus. So I won't talk about it in too much detail because it's very, very similar to DP3T. I think we too will very likely adopt the Apple and Google API. Although when I mentioned this today to the rest of the group, there were at least some people who didn't necessarily agree that all of the details were made that a no-brainer choice, but a lot of people did. So in any case, the architecture is very, very, very similar. So just to go back to some of Anne's questions, I want to pull up. Anne asked us to talk about what other experts and what other input had been contributed towards the design. And as you can see from this slide, there's a large project with all kinds of input from experts across a wide variety of domains. So again, I'm only involved in a small part of this project, but as you can see, we have medical advisory, engineering, experts on Bluetooth, and all kinds of other important different sorts of input. Again, very similar to what Carmela was talking about before. Okay, so that ends the first 2 minutes of my 2 pairs of 2-minute talks. The second thing I want to talk about is just very briefly a little bit of contrasting information about the Australian app. So Australia recently rolled out a contact tracing app. It's a centralized design based on Singapore's Trace Together, which had been out for a few weeks before Australia's. So the idea is that in centralized designs, your Bluetooth ping is an encryption of your ID. And in contrast to the decentralized design, when you test positive, you upload the collection of pings that you have received, and then the authority has the key necessary to decrypt and identify the people that you've been in contact with. The United Kingdom's recently released app uses public key crypto for this, which I think is the sensible thing that anybody in this community would probably do. The Trace Together doesn't. It uses symmetric encryption. So rather than encrypting your own ID on your own phone, you download from the central server an AES encryption of your ID, and then you share that with people that you're near. This is a somewhat odd design, and there's a bit of a discussion in the Singaporean white paper about why they didn't use public key crypto, or why public key crypto didn't quite work for them. In Australia, one assumes they're doing something similar, but they haven't actually been forthcoming about exactly what algorithm they're using. So we're not quite sure. We hope they just copied the Singaporeans, but we are in the dark somewhat. I'd kind of like to have a look at what method of encryption I'm using before I trust my government enough to send around the messages that they have made for me. So how do we know, does it work, is really the most important question, I think. As you can see, this is the little notification that comes up on my phone when I have the app running. It says, COVID safe is scanning to keep me safe. And then I get a cheerful little smiley. Unfortunately, this is somewhat inaccurate, really, if you think about what it might actually be doing, because at best, even if everything is working perfectly, it's not actually keeping you safe, right? At best, if this system is doing everything that one could possibly hope it to be doing, it's helping you to keep others safe by lowering the likelihood that you infect them with something. So there's a fair bit of not entirely honest marketing associated with this app, and there's a couple of other examples too. It seems to work okay on Android. However, like Trace Together, it runs up against Apple's protection of privacy by not really just working very well on iPhones, especially when it's in the background. The Australian app seems to work even less well than it ought to. I'm not quite sure why. It also is supposed to change its random pings every 2 hours, but in practice it actually doesn't. There's a growing community of Australians who have been examining the code, finding a bunch of Bluetooth and other bugs, slowly reporting them to the government promptly and gradually getting them fixed. The Singaporean government seems in practice to be responding more quickly to Australian geeks than the Australian government, but I believe today's release actually has, for the first time, some actual bug fixes, so that's exciting. The Australian authorities have said that they will pivot to the Google Apple decentralized API. I hope they meant it. It would be a huge and fundamental shift in the architecture from the centralized process that they're now using to a completely decentralized one. It would almost certainly work better. And to me, actually, the huge advantage of the decentralized architecture, if indeed they do shift that way, is not so much the threat of abuse of the centralized contact graph, but more importantly, especially in the case of the Australian government, that it just reduces the possibility for a server crash, an accidental piece of bad policy, or some other kind of incompetence to accidentally leak the contact graph. So that's my 2 cents. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was great. Wonderful. It's really fascinating to see one of these things actually in operation. I took a screenshot as you were talking, so I'm glad that we got to actually see one. It's not very impressive as a piece of user interface, but at least it's nice to see one. Good. Okay. So fantastic. We will move on now. And after Vanessa, I'd like to see if Ross is ready to give his 5 minutes. I will do my best to manage this using my poor internet connection and phone. Give me 1 sec. Ah, good, Ross. Ross, we do not hear you, or I don't hear you. I'm going to unmute you against your will.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Good. Okay, many thanks. Contact tracing in the real world is the name of a blog post that I put out on Easter Sunday, which was the day that our health minister announced this app. We'd known about it for a couple of weeks in advance, and it was announced prematurely in order to distract attention from an embarrassing leak that happened that day. Now, traditional contact tracing is something I already knew a bit about, because back in the 90s, I was involved not just in the crypto wars and in producing an AES candidate algorithm, but also in medical safety and privacy. And in fact, 25 years ago, I was busy writing the BMA's Blue Book, Security and Clinical Information Systems. And so something that you know if you've been involved in this, and I've tried to get crypto and security people interested in clinical stuff for years, is that contact tracing isn't anonymous at all. In fact, it's the very opposite, and it's not about consent either. There's over 30 diseases which are notifiable in the sense that a doctor who diagnoses you with them must inform the public health authorities. You know, plague, TB, there's a whole list of the big baddies. Now, when the contact tracing person speaks to you, if you call 111 and report symptoms, is mostly about being persuasive, and you recruit retired doctors, nurses, people with good telephone manner. But compulsion is lawful. If an infectious person refuses to comply, you know, you can forcibly take them to a hospital. Now, the response of other democracies has tended to be driven by public health teams. And in Taiwan, for example, they give their public health teams emergency access to credit card data, phone data, and so on, so that they can trace people quickly in an emergency. And this is perhaps good because it's explicitly an emergency power that vanishes as soon as the pandemic is over. In Britain, on the other hand, we've had our intelligence service involved since early March in producing an app. Now, you have to be slightly careful about apps because different countries use apps for a wide range of things, from symptom tracking to quarantine enforcement. And the tendency of governments is to bundle everything into one app. So even if you've got a contact tracing app that claims to be anonymous, the same app may contain lots of stuff that isn't. Now, the current story starts in January when Singapore tried to use one for contact tracing, using Bluetooth to record proximity events. And we now know that it didn't actually work. And if you look at the post by one of the developers on Medium, automated contact tracing is not a coronavirus panacea, you can see his story. But in early March, the UK NHS didn't know this, and it started to develop an app. So can the app help? Well, we've done bits and pieces with radio over the years and with GPS as well. And there's a couple of immediately obvious problems to anybody who's ever dealt with receiver operating characteristics with false positives and false negatives. The first is that the range of Bluetooth can be anything from 6 inches to 100 yards. And if you set the volume, the RSSI, so that you're highly likely to detect most contacts at 2 meters, you'll get plenty of contacts at 10 meters. So in downtown, you're going to have dozens of false positives. You're also going to get lots of false negatives, because the app that got the widest uptake was that in Iceland, where 38% of the population ran it. And that means that if you are sitting a meter away from somebody on the bus who's coughing germs all over you, the fact that the probability that you're both running the app is 38% squared, which is 14%. And if you get 12% of the people using it, as in Singapore, you get a tenth of that, right? So your false negative rate is anything from 85% to 98% across the range of observed deployment rates of apps. And the third big problem, which is obvious to anybody who's worked in cybercrime and abuse, is that if anybody can input symptoms and broadcast an alert, you're asking for abuse. And as Vanessa pointed out, and Claude as well, that's why the NHS design is to validate symptom reports centrally using analytics plus people. And of course, we're already seeing scams. You've been detected close to an infected person, please put in your credentials here. That's happening already. So what do you do? Well, the anonymous things like the Google, Apple things say you have to get a magic number from a test center. But in the UK, that's not going to work, because up till now, about the only way you get tested is if you're a celebrity like Prince Charles, or if you have got, or if you have ended up in hospital. Now, our government says that we now have about 80,000 tests a day, but it's nowhere near enough. We've got 11,000 care homes in Britain where many of the deaths are happening, and they're limited to 4,000 tests a day. That's 1 per care home per week. And they actually need something like 30 tests per care home per day. Now, Boris, our beloved Prime Minister, says we'll have doubled the number of tests by June. But that still won't be remotely enough, because we already have about 200,000 people infected in Britain and about 30,000 people getting the disease every day. Okay. Now, what happens when we scale up to 1 million tests a day, which we might have by the end of the summer? Well, you're still not going to get tests anonymously, because remember, COVID is a notifiable disease and that is illegal, right? So what's really going to happen? Well, the government has belatedly decided to hire 18,000 contact tracers, and that's what skeptics like me were pushing for from the start. And then the big privacy risk is what happens to the personal data that these human contact tracers will be collecting, and what about all the data at the testing centres? The ethics process around this has been unsatisfactory, and Britain, unlike Australia and Singapore, proposes to keep this data forever for research. So that's the main privacy concern here. The second thing is the placebo risk. If the app is used as a placebo to prod the working classes to go back to work, so that we middle class people can sit safely in our living rooms and talk on Zoom, and the upper classes can sit in their country mansions and collect the profits from the share dividends, what's the effect of that going to be? Is it going to blunt people's judgment of risk? And then finally, there's the political risk. Politicians love to duck hard decisions, and in peacetime, that's perfectly rational. But at times like this, perhaps some hard decisions have to be taken. And is the promise of a technical solution going to make politicians feel that they can duck hard decisions? And our politicians in particular have got form on that. So these are my main concerns. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Ross. Okay, we have one more panelist who I would like to have speak, and then we'll move to questions and answers. Serge, do you hear me? Are you out there? I'm gonna. Yes. Good. Okay. Can you forcefully share your screen, or are you using slides?
I thought Kevin was talking first.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. I'm looking at the wrong document. Yes, my apologies. Kevin, you are first. Go ahead. In fact, we don't have one more, and I don't know why I was saying that. Kevin, you are up next, then Moti, then Serge. Kevin is the controller of all things. Yeah, good. You got control. Good.
Control. Huh? What is that?
There you go. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Bluetooth scanning, which is the basis for a lot of the apps. I have a couple of disclaimers. One, I have no idea what Google is planning to launch for healthcare apps, and I also know absolutely nothing about Apple phones. So, but I did actually teach the Android course at Google for a while, and I actually worked on an application that used Bluetooth scanning, which is why I thought it would be useful to perhaps talk here. The general idea, of course, behind automatic contact tracing is the phone should keep track of other phones that come near it. And so there are these technical questions about how would a phone do that. And it's pretty complicated, actually. It is primarily going to use something called Bluetooth scanning, using something called BLE. Of course, the number of acronyms is always dense. This stands for Bluetooth Low Energy. It was introduced in Bluetooth 4.0 around 2010, so it's quite an old standard. It has dramatically lower power requirements for Bluetooth than the previous version of Bluetooth. Bluetooth is actually quite an old protocol. Bluetooth scanning on Android is actually something that is not well understood, I think. A couple of facts about this: if you turn off Bluetooth on your Android phone, that does not turn off Bluetooth scanning. That's a separate thing in the settings. If you turn off Wi-Fi, that also does not turn off Wi-Fi scanning. And these things are separate controls. You can search in your settings for scanning and you'll find these. So one application for Bluetooth Low Energy is indoor location tracking. I should say something about how location tracking works on Android. There's something called the fused location provider, which uses multiple signals to determine the location of a phone. One of them is GPS, one is the cell phone towers, one is Wi-Fi scanning, and one is now Bluetooth beacons. They have various characteristics. They use more or less power, they work indoors or not. They may have spotty coverage in different places. So for example, if you're hiking out in the wilderness, you may or may not have a cell tower within range. This service is part of what's called Google Play Services, which is a package of applications that is distributed by Google and updated independently of the operating system. It basically runs as root and hosts all local Google APIs. Apps can use Bluetooth in Android, pardon me, When they do so, they have to declare access to these permissions, access find location, because Bluetooth scanning is considered to be part of the location services. Also the Bluetooth permission, and perhaps the Bluetooth admin permission as well. It has various applications, advertising, weather alerts. I have an app on my phone that tells me if there's going to be a weather alert in the area, and it monitors my location. You can see in an Android phone what apps have recently accessed your location. So part of the Bluetooth low energy scanning was originally planned around beacons, and beacons are small devices. I show one here on the screen, which is about an inch in size, about 1/4 of an inch thick, has a battery in it. It can last for years, multiple years on that single battery, and they periodically emit a small signal. They advertise a signal. That signal can be programmed to be a variety of things, a UUID. One of the important parts is a transmit power level. So it has to have a well calibrated transmit level, how much power it's going to use to broadcast. And that's used by the receivers to calculate actually how far away they are from this beacon. They also can broadcast a short URL, and I have to always apologize for that because I was one of the original inventors on the short URLs patent, which you could call obfuscated URLs because they're short. And there are various low-level extensions. In contact tracing applications, phones would typically behave as both beacons and scanners. So they would emit a signal as a beacon would, but they would also scan for other signals. So one imagined application for these Bluetooth beacons is that stores might put these beacons in their aisles, and the phone can learn which products you linger in front of. And it could be used for location-based advertising and marketing. As you can imagine, advertisers were salivating over this prospect because location is a pretty primary signal in the ads quality. Google had actually started a central registry for these beacons, so you could go online and you could register your beacon's ID and its protocols into their registry, and then that would be used in the fused location provider to be able to figure out where you are and interpret the signals that it sees. The amount of information that's released by a beacon is very small because it fits into a packet, and the beacons are constrained on power, so they can't do very much. So there's some questions about this that I think are worth asking. Can phones accurately determine the distance from another phone? This is something that Ross alluded to. It's the way it typically works is that the beacon would emit its transmit power level, and the receiver would calculate what they think their distance is from this based on their observation of the broadcast. It's actually quite tricky to do these calculations. It's dependent on obstructions that are around. It's dependent on reflection. It's dependent on things like, even if the phone has a case on it, it may be emitting a signal, but it doesn't know effectively how much it can be, how accurately it can be received. So there's going to be some variation in these calculations. I have not seen much public about this. I gather that MIT's Lincoln Labs has been doing some experiments on this involving phones, but I have not seen a technical report on that. It's not clear how it's going to handle barriers between two phones. Just because you're close to a phone, even within 6 feet, doesn't mean you're actually at risk. If there's a barrier between you and the other phone, then you're not really at risk. When I scan for beacons in my office here, it turns out that it shows only Apple devices, and I don't have any Apple devices in my household. They're all from the bedroom of the house next door, which is, like 30 feet that way. And so it's not clear that actually seeing another phone is going to be useful. So there's probably going to be a lot of false positives from this. And I think there's also a very serious question about how would an app inform the user of their risk? The CDC regards contact tracing as a human process that's done by people who have empathy and can explain to users what their risk is and help them evaluate exactly who they've been in contact with and what kind of contact they had. But if it's going to tell you you're just within 1 meter of somebody who is at risk, you may not know where. You may not know exactly whether you are at risk from that.
Kevin, I need to finish you up.
I'm done.
Oh, okay, excellent. Terrific.
Good time.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Sorry, I hate being the heavyweight here. I just want to make sure we all stay. Okay. Good. Okay, Modi, you are up next, and I just want to remind everyone while you're getting your slides going, if you have slides, that Moti does not represent Google here, and anybody who says differently will have problems. So please remember, this is Modi's individual opinion. Go ahead.
Do you see my slides?
Yes, we do.
All right, so I will talk about technology-aided contact tracing. I represent myself, as said, and I knew others will cover a lot of the technology. I wanted to ask with a question, to start with a question. We are at Eurocrypt. It's a virtual conference. It's the primary crypto conference. So why are we using Zoom? Don't we know better? I mean, Zoom is known to have many security problems. Almost by any model that you wish, it has insecurity. Probably a paper on secure virtual conference will be much better than Zoom from security point of view and privacy point of view. But our problem is that we don't need virtual conference, we need real virtual conference. So reality has consequences. So to quote Yogi Berra, if the world were perfect, it wouldn't be. So the pandemic versus the technologies. So we have cell phones, and they already gave us many applications like online maps. You can navigate with your phone. You can have other services. You can ride services like Uber and others, mobile payments, and so on. So what about health? And I agree with others. There are well-established health procedures, pandemics procedures. The CDC has them in the US. And contact tracing, which is very, contact tracing sounds like something that was invented after email and after smartphones, but it's a very old technique, manual one to really trace in the containment stage of epidemics and so on. And nowadays we had in Google we had and also in other companies we had the Bluetooth Low Energy, the BLE projects. I worked already on its privacy before, the ephemeral ID. So there are some possibilities to get some privacy with a mobile phone. It's not the goal of mobile phone. And as a technologist, we can ask, we have new technologies, can they help? Not alone, not by themselves, not as a replacement, not divorced of the politics and the country and the setting and the culture around it. But it's indeed happened that grassroots efforts started everywhere in the community, from academia, government, organizations, and industry. This is actually expected because people have social responsibilities, and it's good that it is like this. We don't only write papers about ethics, but we also try to be helpful. And indeed, we are the state of humanity. We all carry mobile phones, and it's getting ubiquitous, even if it's not completely. And when you have a mobile phone and you have communication technology and you have servers and you want to do something, then you have to release your creativity and work on what is our responsibility at this stage. And people, security experts, are well aware that they have responsibility to society. And creativity does not only mean mathematics, proving theorems about, and implementing. Creativity is also in technology, and what technology to use, how to use it, and so on and so forth. And it the problem is tempting from creativity point of view. So some personal realization. When I started to think about it in March, privacy is important. There's no need to give it up just for each problem. So in some sense, can we design with privacy Occam razor that what is the minimum give up of privacy that we want to do? We have to involve the entire population. Indeed, when somebody is sick, probably his privacy is important, but not as important as the system knowing about it and prevention of other things. So, but if we are talking about a countrywide app, hopefully the majority of people are not sick and they deserve their privacy, for example, just as an example of a constraint. Yet the problem in itself is not a pure privacy crypto security problem. It's much more, and I think Carmela spoke about it and others. On the other hand, from an industry point of view, there are numerous constraints to productization of ideas and fast productization of ideas. You need to do to get a product. You have whatever your platforms are, you have performance problems, you have usability problems. If users are not going to use it, it's not going to be effective. You have battery.
Moti, we're running
Yes.
we're running out of time. Just to let you know, we need to wrap up.
Okay. So you need to go into feasibility and you need to involve specification, threat and risk. One more slide. So we need to understand issues are complex. The big picture is complex. It's only one tool, requires product experience. Many opinions are good. Everybody participation is very good. That's the perspective of industry. You guys, whether you design or you attack, it's good. Technologies to policymakers should be, you should be cautious about it. Discussions should be careful. What you present should have understanding of the global context, and hopefully governments, health authorities, and so on can use everything while knowing that users deserve their safety, their health, and their privacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. Okay, we have one more presenter, and that is Serge. I hope now I tried to jump the line with you before, but hopefully you're still here and I can. Good.
I'm here.
Very good. Thank you.
You see my slides?
Yes. Take it away.
Okay, so I'm also representing myself. I'm not representing EPFL. So I will talk about the difference between a centralized system, decentralized system. So in a centralized system, you have some kind of central authority, which is represented as a post office, where users register and they agree with this post office about all the ephemeral identifiers they will be using. And then they meet each other, they exchange their ephemeral identifier. And if Alice gets sick, she reports the identifiers that she has received, and you should consider this as a kind of message that the post office will interpret as an alert to be sent to Bob here. So the post office needs to understand this message as an alert which has to be sent to Bob. So there are people who think that this post office is actually the government, and by doing this, we give to the government the possibility to identify people. So it's bad. So instead, we propose decentralized system where we don't give any advantage to the government, and we replace this post office by a bulletin board. So we make everything public so that the government doesn't have any advantage. So in this system, every participant generates his ephemeral identifiers, they change it, and if Alice gets sick, she reports the identifiers that she has been using, not the one that she received, so that Bob will recognize that he has seen such identifier before, and he will be alerted. So you can see that the systems are very similar, so there are slight differences, but those differences make it has a big consequence in the security. So we can review security, for instance, how is it secure against de-anonymization of all the broadcasts that we can have. So clearly for centralized system, if we have a corrupted server, it can de-anonymize all the broadcasts and connect to some pseudo identity or even an identity if you can break some anonymous channels. You have similar attacks if you have some corrupted phones. Of course, you will need many corrupted phones to do similar attacks. So the attack has not exactly the same range, but phones are more vulnerable than the servers usually. You have also a problem with the social graphs. So for centralized system, so the server can learn things about the social graph about reported people and people that they have met. Because it can de-anonymize the ephemeral identifier. And similar things happen with decentralized system with corrupted phones at another scale. You also have the problem of the anonymity of people who report. So as we have seen yesterday, there is no anonymity in decentralized system. Anyone can de-anonymize people who report as long as he has seen this person before. And for centralized system, similar things happen with only with a server. A corrupted server can, of course, de-anonymize people who report. You have also some problem with deniability because if telephone stores information about all their encounters for a couple of weeks, if you have some forensic attack on telephones, it can be quite embarrassing sometimes. There are problems also with false alert. If someone wants to create some false alert to someone else, scenarios that we imagine is a student who didn't work enough to prepare his exam and wants to have this exam cancelled, can try to provoke a false alert on his professor. In a decentralized system, it's quite easy to set up a black market of identifiers that people would buy just to beam their professor and so that they will get alerts. So this black market will be fed by people who will hunt ephemeral identifier or people who are at risk, like people who work in hospitals or people who go because they are sick. They are likely to be diagnosed soon. And this way you can create an alert making false alerts. We can also imagine some kind of terrorist attack where a group of people is trying to create false alert in the entire city. For that, in decentralized system, it's pretty easy. They just share whatever they're using. They agree on the ephemeral identifiers they will be using, and they spread all these ephemeral identifier around. They meet as many people as they can. And if someone gets sick in this group, the entire city will get alerted, will be considered at risk. So you can see all these differences and now whether one is more important to the other, it's actually a subjective opinion. So there are some alternatives, as I mentioned yesterday. I don't really have time to go through it. So I would like to discuss more about some other personal opinion, like for instance, about the freedom of choice. So people have been telling all the time that all usage will be based on a voluntary basis. People will be free to use this app and they will be free of any social pressure. So it was a wish by everyone, the designers, the politicians, it had been announced, but we can see that it's already not the case. There will be a lot of pressure to use this app, and we can quote things. Here, I took a quote from Carmela, who is here, so it was taken in the press. Adopting proximity tracing apps should be seen as an act of altruism to help protect others from infection. So it was a quote from the press. There is our health minister, Alain Berset, in Switzerland, who is calling for the civic sense of people to volunteer. In the UK government, the government is telling that people who will install the app will do their duty. And there are also some politicians writing some tribune explaining why they will use a tracing app. So if it is not if it is no pressure, I don't know what no pressure means. So here it's clear that people will have pressure. If some people have some good reason not to use this app, they will be taken as people who don't want to protect others, who don't have civic sense, and who don't do their duty. It's clear to me that this freedom of choice is just an illusion. About the matter of choice, we can also wonder what kind of choice we have. it's not a binary, either we use or we don't use. So there is this choice, but there is also the choice of using another app. So we will have an app, but maybe we would like to modify this app in a compatible manner to make some other things. So for instance, if we think of the app that we will have in Switzerland, if we are a privacy freak, we would like to modify it in such a way that we get the benefit of the app, like we will be alerted if we are at risk, but we don't compromise our privacy. For that, it's easy. We just prevent the app for sending any ephemeral identifier, and we nevertheless will get alerted. So do we have the freedom of modifying the app? I don't know. About the freedom to report or not to report, so people say that it will be a voluntary action to click on the report button and to report all the contact. But if we read carefully the law on epidemics, so if someone is diagnosed, he has to announce all his contact. And whether it means that we have to report using the app or not, it will be led to to how people understand it. Yes?
I need to move you. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm almost done. And I would like to finish with two questions, which are not clear to me. First question is, shall we accept automated contact tracing or not? So for me, the answer is not clear at all. Does privacy matter in the case of this situation? It's not clear at all either. If there is any no answer to these questions, then we can just stop discussion and have a beer. But if the answer is yes to both questions, and I'm sure that we have a lot of work to do to make it privacy preserving. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to now turn over the question and answer session to my co-moderators, who I hope will be able to take control of the Zoom.
Yes, we are.
Leo, good, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so thanks to all the panelists for these nice introductions. So we have lots of questions in the Q&A and in the IEICR chat. We will start with one question which has been asked in various forms by many people. And I'll choose the formulation of Aloni, who asked this question to Carmela. So Aloni Cohen is asking, what is the ideal functionality? Do you think an implementation of the ideal functionality, both secure and correct, should be deployed, assuming it's possible to implement? So this is a question that was asked to Carmela. I would like to ask Carmela to start answering this, but obviously the other panelists can have something to say too. So please, Carmela.
It's a very crypto question, but I'm going to try to do my best. So to me, it is very clear, okay, that the functionality of these systems, the first and foremost, is to try to help us lowering the rate of contagion. For that, the functionality of the system is to be able to notify people at risk. And for that, there are a lot of things that need to happen. And one of them is, how do we define from the system whether a person is at risk or not? There were many questions around here. I think both Rose and Kevin said about like the implications of Bluetooth and how do we convert Bluetooth signals into a notification, and that's a very important one. We have been working a lot in the last month in making this type of measurements as precise as possible to actually only notify those people, which is, again, there was a question before also about false positives and false negatives, right? And we need to distinguish the false positives associated to the infection, to the attack rate of COVID-19, whether people are going to be infected or not, from the false positive deriving from the use of an imprecise technology, this is Bluetooth, which we have to accept. But yeah, it's not the best. It was not built for measuring. It will not be built for measuring, right? So at the end of the day, to have the ideal functionality, let's see if we can have something that works as expected or not. There are a lot of knobs to turn in order to get that done. So the question is, if we could have the ideal functionality that would work perfectly, should we deploy it? Well, probably yes, right? Because at the end of the day, we all want to go to our normal lives. There are many other questions about, and if not, should we deploy it? I think that is more of the question that we should be asking here, right? What happens if it doesn't work? And then I think we go into a lot of trade-offs that we have listening here today. And is if we're gonna deploy a technology that may not work because we may not have the ideal functionality, because reality as Marty says, doesn't work as we like, what is the kind of technology that we can remove from the market as fast as it entered?
Thank you, Carmela. Do any of the other panelists want to chime in?
Maybe I say something?
Yeah, please, Moti.
We can formulate an ideal functionality. And actually, when I conducted some feasibility, I actually did some ideal functionality with correctness and security properties. But the problem is that it has to be embedded in technology, and there are limitations for translating the ideal functionality into real, because we have to deal with communication, we have to deal with errors, we have to deal with performance limitations, we have to do with many things that need to happen at the same time, and it's not so easy to translate. I think you have to understand. People have to understand that taking all the limitations, going back to an ideal functionality with all the approximations, it's going to be a very hard task.
Thank you, Modi. Leo, do you want to go on?
Sorry. So the next question, do you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
The next question is about the sunset clause. So basically, is the sunset clause implemented in any of the protocols that we've discussed so far? What are the added cost of enforcing the sunset clause technologically? Maybe the person who will speak about it will also want to detail what precisely is meant by the sunset clause for the participant that might not know. Vanessa?
So I believe Ross is right when he says that the Australian legislation contains a sunset clause. I haven't read it in great detail. I am a little suspicious because, for one thing, I believe the World Health Organization recently said that it was not clear that, in fact, we were ever going to really be rid of this particular infection, which seems very plausible to me. So I think the Australian legislation does contain something that looks pretty civilized and looks like a sunset clause, but I'm concerned that the trigger for that sunset clause may not ever actually eventuate.
We'll find the same in the UK. Our health secretary has said that the data will be kept for as long as is necessary, but the view of the medical professors on the various ethics and other committees is that it is necessary to keep the data forever. And in our health service, we have had a whole series of scandals where, because medical researchers are like the NSA, they want to collect all the data and keep it forever. And while the NSA do it by having master keys, the medics do it by pretending that the data are anonymous and then just waffling when it turns out that this isn't the case. And there's a huge thread of security research on this going back some 40 years now. It's very, very hard getting people to delete data that they want their PhD students to work on.
May I add that in our opinion, that's also a very big difference between the kind of centralized approach and the decentralized approach, which is that this decentralized approach indeed has this list of a lot of identifiers from people that were infected. The list is deleted every 14 days, and this list does not encode anything about identities, locations, or connections with other people. And the system dies by itself the moment that people uninstall their apps and don't upload anything anymore. And even if you keep that list, sure, we may have in some city 400 Bluetooth sniffers that for a bunch of people, they have been tracked absolutely. As opposed to a centralized system that then we need to trust, as Ross just said, that a lot of data that could be re-identified is deleted, and somebody that has data that is very juicy actually has the courage to actually delete the data. So in that sense, we also believe that there is an advantage of keeping a lot of the data in the phone, of doing the risk scoring in the phone, because that means that we don't need to trust that the sunset is actually enforced. The sunset happens by itself. Now, let me go back to one of Ross's point, which I agree with, which is what is the sunset data for manual contact tracing is sometimes much more scary than the digital one, as it's also much more privacy invasive because we're asking about names and locations and visits and times. And that one, to be fair, I really don't know the law here in Switzerland about manual contact tracing, but I would love to hear more about how that is taken in other countries.
Well, if you want to find a real link to the debates of the crypto wars, whether the first crypto war or the second crypto war, again, I think we have to expand the scope. The argument we should have been making back in the 1990s against the NSA is that the biggest threat facing societies was not terrorism, but pandemic disease. Even then, it was #1 on our country's risk registers. And yet all of our social resilience budget got spent on building fancy buildings and buying fancy computers for various 3- and 4-letter agencies. And nothing like enough was spent on stockpiling masks, on building the kind of contact tracing infrastructure that they have in places like Taiwan and Korea. And now we're paying for it, right? To get a measure of these problems, you've got to get your head up from the small crypto problem and start looking at the bigger social problem. And the big problem is social resilience.
Ross, did you voluntarily mute yourself? You cut in the end.
I muted myself after I stopped speaking.
Okay, well, we missed the last word, I think.
Yeah, the big issue here is social resilience. That's the root of this question. How much money do you give to public health and how much money do you give to the NSA? And from that, you can get better results. For example, in Taiwan, they're apparently having this effort led by the public health people who get temporary access to bank account records and to secret police records so that they can trace people better. And that is an institutional structure which has got better chance of seeing to it that the thing is sunsetted. Because once the pandemic is over, the banks will want their customer confidentiality back and the secret policemen will want their secrecy back. And so there is some guarantee that that data will not linger around in the hands of the public health people. That's the level at which you have to start thinking, I think, about sunsetting.
Thank you very much. Or is there another panelist who wants to contribute? Kevin wants to speak. Yes.
Yes, I actually would like to turn this around and ask a question of the audience. And I would like to use the Zoom polling feature for this. This is partly a test for our future virtual conferences, and I apologize to those that are on YouTube because you won't be able to use it, and also to those using the web interface. But this is a question I would pose to you. How willing will these participants be willing to install an app on their phone? Please take a moment to respond to this. We're collecting votes now.
Thank you, Kevin. So while we'll collect votes, we will move to the next question, which is going back before even the sunsetting is starting these apps. So there is one question by Alexandre Anzala Yamayako, who's asking, what's the readiness level of DP3T and Robert? So this is, of course, a question that is addressed to Carmela and Claude. I would like to add also a more general question to the readiness level of the other solutions. What about the integration between the DP3T protocol and the Apple Google API? And also a question directed to Claude, which is, you now have 2 protocols, Robert and Desire. Which one is being implemented in France in the end? So maybe we start with Claude and then we go to Carmela.
Yes. well, clearly it's Robert that will be implemented in the Stop COVID application, which is being tested at the moment. So the code is out there; it's open source, and it's almost ready for deployment. Desire, it's actually something that we define in order to try to come up with some kind of agreement between people that were thinking that we should have everything decentralized, and the others that were thinking that we should have everything centralized. And so the goal of Desire, it's more like a midterm solution that we are hoping to push, because clearly we don't have the time to develop Desire for this for the coming days or coming weeks. But that's something we'd like to push, at least within Europe, in order to get a system that is fully interoperable, because that's very important, right? Especially in Europe, to have something that works across country, and that's even more important, I would say, for smaller countries like Switzerland with a lot of borders. Right.
Thank you, Claude. Carmela?
May I ask a question to Claude? In the implementation of Robert, what is the unlinkability channel in the end? I'm sorry, I didn't have time to check GitHub. I can go there and check.
What do you mean, the unlinkability channel?
So Robert is based on my identifiers going up, the observed identifiers going up through an unlinkability channel. In the white paper, you said mixnet masking is implemented.
Right. No, the requests are sent through a proxy, right? I think you're mixing two things, right? Which is how the requests are sent and all the infected lists are uploaded to the server.
Yeah.
So we're using a proxy for the request, and for the infected node, we are right now using a proxy with two different servers belonging to different authorities. And we are also looking into how to use a mixnet.
Cool. I'll check the code as well. Thanks. So in terms of the readiness of DP3T, we have an app. We have right now, and I'm now going to talk about the Swiss application. At the end of the day, DP3T is a group of 30 people. We don't implement, we don't deploy. Governments implement and deploy. We have a mandate to help the Swiss government in the design of their app, which is being implemented by a startup called YubiKey in Zurich. And right now we have a full system implemented. When I mean full, is that it's an end-to-end. It includes connection to the backend servers, to the health server, the authorization, and everything that is needed, including the legal system is set in place. There are a couple of little things that need to be checked. And we will have a pilot next week. The pilot will actually be done on the Google Apple exposure notification. It is very difficult to think that any other protocol that is not that one is actually going to be in place. That's why we're using that one. We have been working a lot on integrating and checking that it actually works, on making sure that the exposure definition that is on the Swiss law can actually be implemented on the Google Apple exposure notification. And the main goal of the pilot next week is to actually check all of the rest of the processes, right? We need to make sure that when the notification comes, and just to ask also another question that was, I think it was Kevin that in his presentation, he said about how is this notification given to users? The choice that was made in Switzerland is that the app will not notify you that you are at risk. The app will ask you to call a call center that will actually do the job that you're saying, will talk to you, and will guide you through the process depending on who you are, what's your risk kind of bracket, and all of these things help you deal with the fact that you had a notification and what does that mean. So I guess in terms of readiness, we're ready, and we'll hope that next week we can identify all of the hiccups of the big process so that maybe soon we can actually be out there.
I'd like to share the results of the poll that I ran for those who can see them. Alice Silverberg has pointed out that I might get more accurate answers if they believe their votes are anonymous, which I think relates to the social pressure that is brought to bear upon people. Polls are always imprecise. They're biased by the person asking the question and the way the questions are asked. I find it interesting that of this group, which is pretty paranoid, I think, professionally paranoid, I would say, only 26% said outright no.
Thank you for the poll results.
I should perhaps say to the people who are on YouTube, I'm not sure if they even saw the poll. The question was, will you install a COVID contact tracing app on your phone? Multiple choice question. Yes, no, yes if I trust the distributor, yes if it is open source, yes if my government requires it. We'll distribute these results after the fact. Sorry.
Thank you, Kevin. Maybe I know Modi is not representing Google, but maybe Modi wants to share something more on the Apple Google API, or shall we move to the next question?
No, I can say that it's an API level. It deals with Bluetooth notification and scanning and getting IDs that are generated around you with certain estimates, physical estimates of the signal. And then if you need to notify, if you never get sick, nobody need to know about you. It's probably more than 90% of the people. If you notify the people, you get a compressed representation of your identities, and people match it, download it essentially, and match it against their signals that they read on the Bluetooth, and then everybody can build an app that deals with it as it. It's decentralized by nature, and it gives the minimum API support, and people can build on it. And of course, people that want to build other things can need to build different apps and use different things. It's not a mandatory usage, but it took into account limitations of the platform, of the phones, of BLE communication, things that happened in Singapore were predicted to happen. Some of the great designs around are predicted to have problems internally, and at least this was an attempt to get to the community, to people that want to build apps, something that is based on the best knowledge, experience, an estimate of what can be done with Bluetooth scanning and reading, and advertising and scanning, and later on interacting with a server, and people have to build on top of it, and that was the goal. I mean, it's a modest goal to try to help, and whoever wants to use it should use it in the context of their cultural, social, legal system. We didn't mean to replace those.
May I ask a question?
Actually, we are asking questions. Sorry, I think Leo is going to take on next with the next question, if you don't mind, Claude.
Yes, we're running a bit of time, so let's try to answer quickly a few more questions before we leave everyone back home. So a question from Gaëtan Laurent. How should we adjust our language for media and policymakers to give a fair account of what can be achieved? How to offer our best possible solution without necessarily vouching it as a desirable solution? So maybe this is a question for Serge.
Sorry, I didn't get the question. I was answering to another.
How should we adjust our language for media and policymakers to give a fair account of what can be achieved? How to offer a best possible solution without necessarily vouching that it is a desirable solution?
Wow. I don't really know. Actually, if we want to do our job well and we want to have a system which is privacy preserving and secure, I think we have to find better protocol and to make it and to make it work. What I can see when I read the press and when I see what people say about systems which are being deployed is that you have lots of inaccurate things. So people say that current systems are perfectly anonymous, ephemeral identifier are encrypted. I don't think they understand that there is no encryption at all inside. So the ephemeral identifier are just random numbers which we use, but problem is that we use it several times, and the problem is happen when we use them several times. So I think there is a misunderstanding sometimes with journalists and even politicians when they see something is privacy preserving, and there are some big problems hidden.
Thank
Did
you,
I answer the
Serge.
question?
Yes, to the best you could, I guess. Does anyone wants to add something?
I wanted to mention, Anne has pointed out to me that this great selection bias in my poll, which I should have realized immediately, is that the most paranoid people are using the web client. And so it's kind of an obvious bias.
Yeah, and then we cannot vote.
Yeah, we cannot vote either. So the issue is like this: there are attacks on the system that violate privacy, and there are all kinds of scenarios, obviously. But if you never get sick, at least it's maybe you lose your privacy because of the side channels that are employed in the attack, but not because of the exposure notification, because you don't notify anybody, you just absorb. Hopefully this will be 90+% of the people. They will participate in the system. They will get perfect secrecy in some sense. At least that's the approach. For benign users that check other people, over 90% if it's deployed globally, over 99% of the people, the signals that you see, you never met. So you'll get privacy from that point of view. It doesn't mean to get privacy if you read your neighbor's signals all the time and your neighbor gets sick. Hopefully it's of course you will recognize this if this is the only signal you get. And I mean, there are no magic in this. The attacks are relatively simple and should be understood. And maybe journalists don't understand them, but I think security professionals do understand the risks, and they were quite quantifiable by numerous people. And it's good to put the attacks on the table too. I'm not saying these attacks are not needed, but a lot of the designs are highly theoretical, and a lot of the attacks are highly theoretical. In reality, malicious people, well, they can play with the system, but they are busy kind of writing ransomware, busy making money rather than just disturbing most of the time. If you think this is a problem, it is a problem.
So, I mean, can I just say something? So basically, Moti, what you just said is that only few people will get sick. And so basically, it doesn't really matter if they lose their privacy, right? But the problem with the decentralized scheme is that if you get sick, you lose your privacy toward everybody, right? So not only you can get re-identified very easily,
everybody, please.
but
Can you please
anyone
define
can.
everybody?
Yeah, what is everybody?
Any people, anyone that get access to the.
Okay, so it's not everybody. It's anybody that has seen you and had put a Bluetooth sniffer and that had put a bunch of Bluetooth sniffers to track you. Okay, let's start.
They are not. They're not theoretical.
99% of the people never see your signals. So when it is said you are sick, they don't know you. And I gave another example. Your neighbor only reads your signal.
Theoretical attacks.
Okay, we cannot all speak at the same time, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds each. Carmela, you start, and then Claude will finish. Thank you.
No, my only point is that we need to, when we say everybody can learn, we need to define who is everybody and who's going to learn what about whom. And numbers are a question here, because we're talking about putting how many Bluetooth identifiers. We know that if somebody actually sets up a small surveillance infrastructure around their neighborhood, they will be able to surveil people in the neighborhood. This is not mass surveillance. This is very targeted surveillance in a very small place.
Thank you, Carmela. Claude, do you want to answer for 30 seconds?
Of course, but the same thing applies to, I would say, the centralized, right? I mean, the server is only able to re-identify, is able to deploy this sensor, right? So the scalability issue applies as well to the centralized approach. The thing with the decentralized is that, as you said, maybe it only applies to a small area, but if you have a lot of people that deploy these sensors and somehow they manage to synchronize themselves, you can have like a mass surveillance system that is performed by any group of people, right? So I will not say that because only a few number of people get sick, basically we don't care about these people. I mean, I think it's scary because not only, once again, they get re-identified, but you can count how many people were sick in a certain area. You can trace them, so you know exactly where they've been. Exactly. So this is quite, I mean, it's a tool for stigmatization, right?
Thank you, Claude.
And we should not ignore this type of attacks. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Claude. More questions for the panelists?
Did you call me, Leo?
Yes, you have more questions for the panelists?
Yeah, we have lots of questions. We won't be able to ask them all, sorry. But I want to come back to something that was mentioned earlier by both Carmela and Claude, something about interoperability. So at this moment, there are various solutions which are more or less compatible between them. We have DP3T, we have the Google Apple API, which may be considered the same or not. And we have centralized solutions like Robert, which are not easily interoperable. Yesterday, the European e-health network approved some guidelines saying solutions should allow member states, we're talking Europe here, should allow member states server to communicate and receive relevant keys between themselves using a trusted and secure mechanism. So how do you see this requirement to have data move between the different apps used by the different European countries, or if we want to move this to the United States between different states in America, how do you see this requirement go with the different approaches that each country is taking? So sorry, I should give the word to someone. Let's maybe start with Claude, and then let's move to Carmela.
I mean, that was exactly the motivation, once again, for Desire, right? So the motivation was to try to define the third way, where we try to come up with a solution which is a mixture of both schemes and take the best of both worlds. The motivation also was to convince Apple that since the argument not to open to the API was privacy, to commit that we actually come up with a scheme that we think is better than the current decentralized scheme in terms of privacy. And it doesn't happen. It didn't happen, but not yet. So it would be interesting. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask to Moti. Why will it take actually to have this API open to other type of application other than decentralized? So and in the current situation, as you said, we have so-called centralized and so-called decentralized, which do not interoperate and are not interoperable. But I'm not sure actually whether we want them to be interoperable, right? Because they don't provide the same kind of security and reliability, right? So you don't want, if you have like a scheme that we think is reliable, you don't want to get noise from unreliable systems. So you can have interoperable system if they provide the same kind of level in terms of robustness and security, which is clearly not the case today with the current situation, with the two systems.
Thank you. Let's give the word to Carmela, and then we move to Modi, who's asking to speak. Carmela, please.
So I think what Claude said is correct. Like interoperating these two solutions is very hard because they have very different goals in life. They share exactly opposite data. So making them interoperate means that one of them is going to lose their privacy properties, and then there is basically no point on doing this. I fully agree with him. On our side, a week ago, we put up a proposal for interoperability that was signed with people from other countries interested in a decentralized solution. Portugal, Germany, Austria, Italy. We nowadays need to add Greece and people in the US that are already start to develop and to deploy this app in the States, because we truly believe that if we want to go out, and especially in Europe, and Claudio said before, Switzerland is a very small country and we have a lot of people that work across the border. So we really need to be interoperable. We truly believe on that. And we're working on a technical specification that we hope that can come out next week, where we can actually propose a very concrete way of doing this, including the fact that some countries, because of their test capabilities, cannot really do this informed and verified testing. So we need to find a way of actually being able to filter this kind of things in the system without stopping interoperability, because the countries have less testing capability does not mean that they stop being in Europe and we stop traveling to them.
Thank you, Carmela. Modi?
Yeah, interoperability inside the system between different countries and center, federation, and so on is very important. Back to the previous questions that I was asked by other panelists. So first of all, I didn't say that the attacks, the local observation with side channels are theoretical. I said there are scenarios that they become theoretical. If you see an ambulance come to your neighbor and goes to the hospital, at this time you already know, even if you don't have an app and he does not or she does not have an app. So you have to quantify the risk. You deploy a system within a bigger system. You have to run risk management and evaluate it. There are obvious risks in everything, and you say, okay, I have a centralized system and I completely trust myself. Well, we are in the authority. We know how to protect the data, but hackers know how to break into your data. So everybody is telling a partial story, inflates the risk of the other guy and disinflate their own risk, and that's not so good. Risk management has to be objective, and it has been done with respect to the third way. The third way generates identities nicely, private, interactively, and the problem is interactively. Bluetooth, you have to check that you can do these interactions in an effective way and not start missing signals like Singapore and Australia are missing. It's a technology issue. That's why when I spoke about ideal functionality before, I said, oh well, but you have to take these things into account and codify them in the functionality. And then when you have errors in your functionality, you're going to implement errors. That's it. So saying the best should be qualified, saying the worst should be qualified, saying attack has to be qualified, and the mechanisms are threat analysis and risk analysis. And this have to be done and have to be done objectively, and each solution probably has its own problems, and then it's a matter of subjectively deciding where to operate. It's not that you first develop the system and then you come up with a grand explanation why your system is so great. because that's already and that this is the usual fallacy. And let's leave this to politicians. We are technicians.
Yes, thank you, Moti. So I want to rebound on the risk assessment. What about benefit assessment? And I think maybe this is a question that is, ignored by our community because maybe we're not experts, but I think it is important to consider it and to not consider risk management alone. Maybe Ross wants to comment on that.
Yes, the app that is being deployed in Britain, and the same will hold for the apps being deployed elsewhere, are medical devices, right? They're grade 1 medical devices like a thermometer. They don't kill you directly if they go wrong, but if they give you wrong information, that could cause harm. Now, when you deploy drugs or medical devices, you have to do testing and you have to get ethical approval. Now, in the UK, they did last week a trial in the Isle of Wight. Now, this was highly irregular because they had an ethics committee for it, but the ethics committee was not told what the questions under investigation were, right? Because politicians didn't want there to be an answer which said no, right? Which is the whole point of a drug safety test or a medical device safety test. And no information was given to the ethics committee about the data protection considerations, like when the data would be deleted or anonymized or whatever. In other words, the whole ethics thing was a sham. Now, if you tried to deploy a vaccine, having done make-believe tests or having done tests only on some poor people in Africa, right, then the ethics committee would nowadays hold you up for this. Now, I'm concerned that this community is getting itself involved in the unethical and untested deployment of a medical device which could do harm if people rely on it when it turns out to be not doing any real work. That is the core of the question here. Are you doing something that is unethical and which, if it does harm, you could be held to account for later on?
I think it's a very good question, Ross, and I share those concerns with you. And the more, again, I'm going to go back to once we actually, or at least I don't know the benefit, we don't know what is going to happen, because so far we cannot even do big tests, because at least in Switzerland or in where I live in Canton de Vaud, we cannot be in groups of more than 5 people. So we cannot really run tests. Now, it is true, we're going to go out with something that is very experimental, and that the more, to me, it is important that we do it with the more care possible. And like, just let me clarify that it's not that we do not care about these infected people. Now, we have to deploy something that is practical, that can be done with the technology that we have nowadays. And a lot of the choices that we have made are based on the infrastructure that we have. Now, we would be very happy to work with other technologies if they were actually feasible. We considered that in the beginning, we gave them up. And that's why I think the risk analysis is very, very important, because we're deploying real systems. So we cannot really go for ideal functionalities and ideal, we're going to have an anonymous communication and a linkability, because all of these things cannot be done with the technology we have today. Now, we need to work on better ways, I agree with you, on finding this paparazzi attack and reduce them without the need to rely on infrastructure that does not exist, and without actually killing the batteries of the phones, because otherwise we're just not going to have any acceptance.
Maybe someone wants to answer to Carmela?
I'm just going to answer the Ivan that is in the chat asking if I can prove. Well, we don't have anonymous communications technology nowadays that can handle the millions of users that are going to use this system. I wish the Tor network actually could handle this. I really, really wish. And I even more wish that we would have a mixed network deployed and working right now, right? That has been my work of the last 10 years. And sadly enough, we have not gotten.
Well, I mean, we're not talking about millions of users, right? I mean, this is only the infected nodes that will upload their data to the server. So it would be like few thousand people per country.
How do we deal with the delay then? What is the good delay? How do we deal with the delay?
I mean, how do you deal with the delay with the decentralized? I mean, of course, there will be some delay in the uploading, but there will.
No, the question is, if I need to upload 100 contacts and I need them to be mixed with few people, how do we make sure that mixing is good without having delay? Because we have an impossibility result, it's called the anonymity trilemma, in which you either have bandwidth, delay, or anonymity. So now I'm in a pickle here.
What I'm saying is that the delay doesn't matter. I mean,
the delay matters for computing the risk. The delay matters for the ideal functionality of the system, about when do I compute the risk? When do I have enough observations to actually make sure that I actually have a truthful information, going back to Ross, and that we're actually giving the users the information that they need in a timely manner? Because if we don't do this in a timely manner,
Carmela, this is not turning in the kind of discussion that we intended for. Yeah. Furthermore, you've had the fair amount of the overall time. Yeah, I think some of the speaker maybe did not have that many opportunity. Maybe I will give a few last words to Serge and then Vanessa, and we will close this up. Serge, is there anything that you would like to add?
Thank you very much. Yes, actually, so I have a question, because now we have all those people who work in different teams in a concurrent manner. I think that everybody is doing extraordinary amount of work, but there is some concurrency which is, I think, not so optimal, and I think there is one room to have. To design some better scheme, and there was one proposal which was made by Claude, and I'm wondering if people would respond to this invitation to come together to define a better protocol. So that's my wish.
Thank you, Serge. Vanessa, for a few last words before Matt closes up.
I mostly agree with everything that Carmela has said. I mean, it seems to me that DP3T is a much better protocol. Together with MIT Pact and other decentralized protocols, is better in a variety of ways than the centralized protocol that Claude and others are proposing. So I think Carmela has spoken well, and I think she got the most airtime because she got the most aggressive questions.
Thank you. Matt?
Okay, well, thank you. It was a really interesting discussion, and I will say that I kind of enjoyed, I know we want to keep things civil, but I enjoyed that people were able to sort of have these arguments here, because I don't think it's so easy to do it anywhere else. And it was interesting hearing the different opinions on sort of what the right system is. So with that, we're way over time. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and those of you who stayed with us for the entire discussion in the audience. Thanks so much. And I believe that this talk will be posted on YouTube after the live stream is over. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
So thanks very much. And thanks to our panelists and moderators. You all did a fantastic job. So as a panelist, thanks to all of you for the great discussion. They all prepared nice presentation within a few hours only. And a great thank, of course, to Matt, Leo, and Luca. Congratulations for handling this discussion perfectly. So thanks all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.